In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the beginning of Genesis and the beginning of the creation story in the Bible or in the Christian religion. Now, what if I told you that there's more to this story than what most of us started off with? For one, the word used there is Elohim in the place where there is God, and that proves that there's a little bit of a translation error. See, in Hebrew, anything that ends with im, the yod mim, is plural. So if we were to put that in English, it's in the beginning, the gods created the heavens and the earth. And then we get down and we see more of this conversation. It says, and then they said, let us make man in our image. This again is a plural discussion. This is more than one person talking amongst themselves. Now, this is really where humanity comes into play, right? In the creation of what we know as Adam, they take all of what the Elohim was, whatever this plurality is, and they put it into a singularity. The all-in-one is Adam, but he's the all-in-one made physical. There's something special that's happening here. There's even codes hidden within the Hebraic, such as the name Adam itself. See, Adam isn't even just the name of the male. Both the male and female Adam, once we eventually got to a male and female Adam, they were both called Adam. They were just designated as male and female. That's because the name Adam in Hebrew actually means God's blood, Elohim's blood. You have Aleph, which is the spirit, which is breath, which is power. And then you have Dam, which means blood. Blood, again, is records. So it's the records of the spirits, the recordings of the spirits, the essence of the spirit. That's what Adam is. So Adam is a living library of all the genetic codes of whatever that plurality that they called Elohim is. Now, understand that the Bible does not begin in Hebrew. In fact, if you actually read the Bible, you watch their culture evolve. You don't get into Hebrews, the actual people of the Hebrews, until you get to Abraham, even though he's not the founder of the Hebrews. No, that's actually Eber, one of his ancestors. From Abraham, you get his descendants, which we call Abrahamic. And it's not until you get Israel, which is his grandson, and then you have his great-grandson, Judah, where we eventually get the Judeans, who we now call the Jews. I'm saying this for genealogy's sake, that there's an entire history that happens long before you get to something called a Hebrew, and long before you get to anything called an Israelite, long before you get to something called the Jew. They were Mesopotamians. They were Mesopotamian people. They were Sumerian people. In fact, the Hebrew origins, when we speak of their genetics, their lineages, they come from the Dravidian Hindus and they come from the Sumerians. And we see this not just in their structure and their genetics, but in their folklore, in their spiritual practices. I've done another session talking about their genetics and really breaking down the details. If you want that, you can find it on the channel. I'm telling you this for a reason. You have to understand the culture of the groups that you're discussing, right? So we have the Hebrews, who were a nomadic people. They also were a people who did not believe in writing for the first major part of their history. They considered writing taboo. So they passed along all their stories verbally. Now, if anyone's ever played the game telephone, that means that every time a story gets told, it gets altered slightly, and it gets altered slightly, and it gets altered slightly, and then it greatly differs from the way that it might have been told the first time, even assuming that the first time was the true time. So by the time the Hebrews actually start writing and recording, they're dealing with generations of not just first hand, not second hand, not third hand, not fourth hand, but generations of hands of a story being retold. So it's been through the game of telephone a little bit, so it's altered, right? And I'm not saying that to demean it or to shun it, just to put it into perspective for this next part. Now, considering that we're dealing with a people that both have their origins in the Indus Valley and in the Sumerian region, this is why a lot of those older stories mirror each other, because you're dealing with the verbal retelling of the stories from both of these places. This is why the story of Manu from the Hindu tradition very clearly mirrors the story of Zasudra or the Epic of Atrahasis or Utnapishtim. Very similar. And that is the same as the story of Noah in the Bible. They're the same story telling the same events, but they're telling it in different ways. It's not even a case of plagiarism or stealing. This is what happens when you share a story. It changes slightly. Some people who tell the story like a certain part of the story, so they focus on that part. They might not care about another, so they might forget to mention it in their retelling of the story. I don't want to imply malice. But what I will say is that the older versions of these stories tell a different story concerning human origin. So I've said this before, when dealing with the Bible, you're dealing with scriptures that come from the Sumerians, from the Canaanites, from the Hebrews, from the Hindus, from the Kemites/Egyptians, and they're all haphazardly stitched together by Romans, is what we currently have as a Bible. And I've learned to treat the Bible like Wikipedia. When I was in school, they said you can't use Wikipedia as a source, but you can use the sources from Wikipedia as a source. So I'll oftentimes, in my studies, I'll read something in the Bible and I'll come across it in an older text. Saying, oh, this is the thing, this is the earlier version of this story. And in that older version, you often get a lot more context. I'm still talking about the human structure, right? I'm still talking about Adam. When you read the Sumerian account, now understand they speak a different language. What the Hebrews say is Elohim is the same as what the Egyptians call Necheru, which is the same as the Sumerian word Anunnaki. Please leave the sci-fi and fantasy off to the side. Because oftentimes when you hear the word Anunnaki, because of popular culture, I'm not saying people are doing something wrong. I'm saying that they're doing something slightly inaccurate. They're forcing something to fit a Star Wars presentation, not exempting us from the fact that some of that stuff is true. Please hear me for what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. Anunnaki is just the Sumerian word for gods. It's just the Sumerian equivalent of Elohim, Necheru, Devas. It just means gods, right? But it's the family of gods. And I like the word Anunnaki because it actually speaks to the structure. It's the family of Anu and Ki. This again speaking to Father God, Mother God, and all of their descendants. Why does this matter? Now, Enki is the firstborn of Anu. He is the scientist. He's the one who fashioned man from clay. The Egyptians, the Kemites, they call him Khnum, the molder, the one who takes the clay and molds it. Now, in the Sumerian mythology, in their story, he takes this clay, he shapes man out of him and his wife. They make man, and they breathe this breath of life. Now, hold up for a moment. Oftentimes, when you hear this, you think of just the creation of some statues. Not quite. But let's just say that this special clay that they're using in the design that they're doing, see, it's not just sculpting. It's not just giving it a shape and then breathing life, pow, it comes to life. Not just, right? There's something that happens that Enki does that irritates his younger brother, who ends up calling himself the Most High and is the God most of us understand from whatever religion you come from. Now, he's the one who commissions the project in the Sumerian stories. He's the one that actually says, hey, let's make man in our image. But he has a different idea in mind concerning man. He wants something with the same capabilities as the rest of the Anunnaki, but able to go do the work that they don't want to do. This time, they're spiritual, but they're also physical. Another topic altogether on the density exchanges that happen in different realms. It's a whole nother plot. So stay on track with me. So he takes he commissions his brother, the scientist, the sculptor, the craftsman, and he says, I want you to make something that can do everything we can do so that we don't have to do it. Now, in doing this, Enki has a different idea in mind. He says, let's just make some family. So what he does is he takes the blood of the gods, the information, the genetics of the whole family, and puts it into the Adamic race, into the people that he's creating. Let's say Adam. Let's keep it singular for now. He puts it all in Adam. And so this singular form has all of their genetics, has all of their blood running through it, but also built within the design, he actually creates different altars or different structures within us that function just like the rest. So you think of the Sentinels from X-Men Days of Future Past that are able to adapt on a whim. That's kind of what Enki made us as. Yes, fashioned out of clay, more so fashioned out of physicality. That's taking all of this essence and then solidifying it is a better way to look at it. It's not just random dirt on the ground. It was a special clay that they used, deep sea clay, actually, which was more of a dark grayish reddish color. But the important thing I wanted to note was that within our structure, our different organs and different organ systems are actually a recreation, or as you would say, a microcosm of how the Elohim operate in the heavens. So all of us in our structures, for example, Enlil was the god of the wind. He's the god of the air. That's why we have lungs. That's an engagement towards one of the entities that went within our design. This is why it's possible to say, let everything that has breath praise the Lord when talking about Enlil or Yahweh in the Bible, because it's speaking to the fact that if you have the system within you to engage with the wind, to engage with the air, you're engaging me. He's not the only one that has a structure within ourselves that's connected. All of us are connected to all of the Elohim, all of the Anunnaki. There's a structure within each of us. See, the body is a temple, and within the temple, there are many altars. And within those altars, we actually have a bunch of points of contact. Again, what's an altar? An altar is a point of contact between two realms, between a person and something else. You can consider your Wi-Fi router as an altar. It takes the internet from elsewhere and then funnels it into your house. You can look at a water fountain or a sink as an altar. It takes the water from wherever your area sources their water from, and it pushes it through your house and gives it an outlet. Now you can engage, let's just say it's the river. You can engage that river from your house because you have a point of contact within it. So in dealing with an altar, it says, hey, this is the state, this is the place where I engage this thing. This is where we meet. A temple as a whole is an altar filled with many altars. So there's so many points of contact within us. We're super intricate. This is why in the Hebrew system, they did something interesting. They had all these gates around, and all these gates were named after this different element. You have the lightning gate, the fire gate, this gate, that gate. You go in, you have this altar, that altar, this altar, that altar. Let's talk about Solomon for a moment. Oftentimes, we've heard about Solomon's tabernacle, Solomon's temple, being used as a metaphor for our body, our structure, our triune system, body, soul, and spirit. He built a temple that had 3 sections. Just as we have body, soul, and spirit, it had outer court, inner court, holy of holies. Nothing's wrong with that. Now, remember the story of Solomon. Solomon does something very interesting. He asks his God, he asks Yahweh, he asks Enlil for wisdom, and he gets it. Notice what Solomon did with that wisdom. First, let's clarify what wisdom is. And I mean that pun intended. The word wisdom means clarity. It's mean to see something for what it is. And he was able to do that to the nth degree. So what does Solomon do with this wisdom? Oh, he starts to build altars to the other gods in the pantheon. The pantheon, yes, there is a pantheon in the Bible. Of course, I've done another video on this where I talk about the pantheon of the Bible, but there is a pantheon in the Bible. A lot of the deities used are Canaanite, Yahweh included. Yahweh is just one of many, but he was the one that they were supposed to be engaging. He said, I don't want y'all talking to nobody else. To the point that they forgot there was somebody else. Solomon gains wisdom, and the first thing he sees is the other family members. So he starts to honor them. He starts to build space within the temple for them. This offends Yahweh, but notice something. Yahweh does nothing to Solomon in this interaction. He waits until he dies, and then he raises up 3 or 4 other people in order to help destroy his son. That's how jealous he got. Now, there's a reason I'm talking about this. If they were weaker gods, if they were lesser gods, Yahweh could have wiped them out himself. Instead, he doesn't. He waits. Why is that? Well, 2 Kings chapter 3 actually tells you a story where Yahweh loses a fight to one of the gods that Solomon ends up building an altar to within the temple. Which makes sense only if you accept the fact that Solomon was given wisdom. He was able to see something that the other people couldn't see. He saw more family members. Now, paralleling his temple to our structure, guess what? There are spaces within us that are dedicated to other entities that you're not too familiar with. There's areas of Chinese mysticism. I want to say it's in Taoism. It could also be, forgive me for not researching beforehand, it could also be within Tibetan Buddhism, but they even have, instead of just having the chakras, they have deities who are supposed to be seated on each of those chakras in order to have optimum operations within the human system. Within our system, they say, hey, this one's supposed to rule here, this one's supposed to rule here, but they don't limit it to just the chakra system. No, they go into the organs. The kidneys are very important. They say that's the point of power, that's the point of fire. So there's an entity that's meant to be engaged there. There's entities of the lungs, there's entities of the liver, and they specify on the inner pantheon of the self so that each altar within this temple is able to engage the right entity, and that creates a state of immortality. That means every part of you is functioning to the nth degree. It's functioning in synergy with the deity or the energy, the spirit that it was created for. Now understand this, I am not a Yahweh worshiper. I'm not. I am in a different kingdom altogether. I work with Yeshua. That's the whole point of an Old and a New Testament. A testament is a will. If your God has 2 wills, they're double-minded, schizophrenic. No, 2 testaments, 2 gods, 2 different offers, 2 different wills, 2 different desires. Yeshua's kingdom operates different from Yahweh's kingdom, and we know this already. I talk about this in my lecture, the Empire of El. And of course, I have a session on Patreon and on YouTube membership called The Tale of Two Brothers, which goes into a lot of this in more detail. Now, the point that I want to drive home is that because of the way that Enki structured us, and if you're reading between the lines, you've read pretty well, because of the way we're structured, as Adam, the fullness of the Anunnaki, the fullness of Elohim is found itself into our structures. So not only are we genetically related to everyone, but we have something that the others do not have, which is the capability to operate in the fields of all of them. Because of how we're structured, there's some Enki in us, there's some Enlil in us, there's some Anu in us, there's some Ki in us, there's some Ninerzag in us, you get the point. So fully walking in your divinity, or really, let's just say mastering the physical self, is mastering the altars of the temple, knowing how to engage which parts. I emphasized that I'm not a Yahweh worshiper earlier, not just to throw out a quick fact, but to say that without me worshiping him, being a devotee, his principles still work because they're in my system. So Hebrew breath work, or as the Hindus call it, pranayama, works just fine without me being in allegiance with him because the system is here. That actually speaks to the power of humans. This also speaks to why Yeshua walked around and said, hey, don't you know that ye are gods? Gods, again, is Elohim, which is, again, Anunnaki. Don't you know that you are the Anunnaki? Don't you know that you are the gods, the Elohim? Speaking to us as individuals, but also speaking to our system. That it's a all-in-one and the representative of one happening all at the same time. Yes, there is an aspect of divinity that you specifically are, but within your system, everyone's here. Everyone's here. The collective is here. I had an encounter with the Father a few years ago where I met him in his office and he was standing on the other side of his desk. He pulled me around the side and he took his hand and moved it over. And as he did, I watched all of creation pour out of his hand and onto the table. Stars and planets and stuff I didn't know what it was called. I'm just watching creation pour out of his hand. And one of the things that he said is that what you love is within you. Love is the thing that connects us to everything and everyone. Or as the Bible would put it, love covers a multitude of sin. Sin meaning separation. Sin is not an action, it's a state. Sin is separation. Love covers a multitude of separation. What the Father was showing me in that moment, because he elaborated a bit more, he was saying that all of the atrocities of the world happened once we started to focus too much on how different we were instead of on how alike we are. Empathy is created, love is created, compassion is created when I can actually relate with you. So within the human system, we actually have the ability to relate to everything. We're related to everything. This is why we talk to animals. This is why we talk to plants. George Washington Carver. This is why aliens and ETs are trying to get our body. Guess what? We're related to them too, because all of creation was put into Adam. The mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the fungi kingdom, the different genomes and structures. This is why you notice some people look more like cats, some people look more like dogs, some people look like this animal, that animal. Some people don't quite look like animals, they look more plant-like. If you pay close enough attention, that's just keeping it simple because there's a little bit of everything in all of us. And that's Enki's design. Because we're related to everyone and we have structures within ourselves related to everything, we can actually do anything. And that's why ignorance is a weapon. My people perish due to a lack of knowledge. Not knowing that you are the all-in-one is why you die of lack. You don't know not only are you connected to everything, that you are everything, but that you have access to everything. You die without access. You don't operate in your access, not because you don't have it, but because you don't know that you have it. This, again, is all in the system. This is just Adam stuff, which is why it says that Adam was made a little bit lower than the Elohim. Some Bibles mistranslate and say that it was made a little lower than the angels, and that's not true. Little lower than the Elohim, mean made a little lower than the family we're based on, which still means everything else is beneath us. Everything else is under us. Now, understanding covenant, when something is stolen, if we're reading the Old Testament, right? When something's stolen, it's supposed to be returned sevenfold. So let's say you're made a little bit lower. Oh, in redemption, you end up, let's be nice and say equal to. Now you get to rule and reign with Christ. That's why he's not asking for worshipers. His mission was focused on family and remembrance. It's so much in Passover. Again, I've done sessions on Passover, but it's in the drinking of the blood and the eating of the body, or the eating of the bread and the drinking of the wine, that it actually helps you remember, all of this stuff that I'm sharing with you, these different codes. Who am I in the heavens? Where am I? Where am I seated? What's my position in the heavens? Where do I rule and reign from? What am I here to do? This is why he says, this ye do in remembrance of me. Remembering who you are. Come on, watch Lion King again. It's not becoming something, it's remembering something. So y'all, I'll leave you with that. Hopefully I gave you enough to sit and think on, to ponder, to meditate on, hopefully steer you in the right direction. As usual, if you want to connect with me or any of the stuff I have going on, feel free to check it out on my website, caveofmystery.org. There you can find my courses, classes, books, trainings, upcoming mentorships, and everything else. Until next time, y'all be blessed. Later.